of you for coming today. I was thrilled to receive an invitation to come and speak to this year's festival. I wasn't so thrilled when I arrived here and couldn't find a damn parking spot. But my neighbor, Rebecca, kindly gave up hers so I could park my car. So I made it, and it's good to be here. Before I get started, I want to plug a talk that I'm hosting at the University of Florida on Tuesday night. Rebecca Renner, this is her first book. It's received all sorts of accolades in the national press, including the New York Times Book Review. She's a native Floridian, and she'll be speaking at Pugh Hall, where the Bob Graham Center is on campus at 6 o'clock on Tuesday night. Open to the public and free. So it's a wonderful book, by the way. Has to do with alligator poaching, but also about the alligator as a species and what it means to us, both as a symbol and as a part of our Florida ecosystem. Excuse me. So it's January 1918, and I've just signed a contract for my new book, The Bald Eagle. My previous book was The Gulf, The Making of the American Sea. It had come out 10 months earlier, and it had done well. It had received really nice reviews in the national press. It won the Kirkus Prize, and it was a finalist for the National Book Critics Circle Award. And I was talking with my editor, and again, January 1918, and he was saying, well, the book... 1918? What's that? Oh.
You're not that old.
You're right. But as a historian, I'm used to older dates. But for some reason, even though I'm a historian, people at book talks always ask me about the future, which I've never been able to figure out why. But in any case, 2018. Okay. And January 2018, my editor says, well, referring to the Gulf, he said to me, the book has had a good run. Now note the past tense. The book has had a good run, and I had to agree with him. Beyond my expectations, and I was thrilled. And I just signed this new contract for The Bald Eagle. I was very excited about this book and writing it. Now, move ahead to April 2018, and it's April 16th, as a matter of fact. And I'm teaching. It's the spring semester at UF, and I'm teaching. I'm also deep into writing The Bald Eagle, and but in my office, I was not writing The Bald Eagle. I was chewing out a student. I was teaching a graduate seminar that semester, emphasizing writing, trying to get these students to write as they should be writing as graduate students. And so I was meeting with the students individually that afternoon to discuss how well they had been doing or not. And this particular student I was meeting with had not been doing a very good job. He had disregarded all of my edits and kept making the same mistakes over and over, just turning in sloppy work. And so I'm reading the riot act to him, and I'm having a good time. And then my phone rings, and my office phones ring, but I ignore it. And then my cell phone rings, and I ignore it. Then it dings with a text, and it dings with another text, and it rings again. And then the office phone is ringing again, the cell phone's ringing again. And I'm getting irritated, not with the student at this point, but with the interruptions, because I'm having such a good time reading him the riot act. But I started worrying there must be something wrong at home. And so I excused myself, and I said, I should check these messages. And so I turn around and grab my phone on the desk behind me, and I look at it, and there's a text from my editor. And he said, the Gulf has won the Pulitzer Prize. And I stood up. And let me tell you, there's so many Pulitzer Prize winners have very similar stories. A friend of mine who was on the golf course having a shitty day on his, he got his text and it said, only thing it said, dude, the Pulitzer. My text wasn't so eloquent, but I stood up when I saw it. I stood up, and because it's from my editor, I know it's real. I stood up, and let me tell you, I had no idea. I didn't know the Pulitzers were being announced. They don't announce the finalists beforehand, so you don't know whether you're in the running or not. I didn't even know when they were announcing it. The book had already had a good run. The Pulitzer was nowhere on my radar. And I stood up and I said, holy shit. And then I went, I'd never had this happen before, I went literally speechless. And I didn't know how to tell the student what was going on. He's got this worried look on his face. And so I slide the phone across my desk to him, and his eyes bug out after he reads the text. And I know what he's thinking. Meeting's over. And he was right. The meeting was over. But I have to say that the next week when he turned in the final draft of his paper, by then I had some street cred. All my remarks had some street cred. And it was perfect. And so that was wonderful. And so that's my little story about winning the Pulitzer. One little addendum is that the next 2 hours I was in my office on the phone with the press, and they're already getting stuff on the internet. They get off. And so one reporter had actually did this Q&A with me and put it up online, and my daughter's mother knew about the Pulitzer before I did, and called our daughter, who was I think 11 years old at the time, and she said, Google your dad. And so she went online and she read this interview, and I was asked, what are you going to do to celebrate? I said, I have no idea. I was still in shock, and I said, I don't know, I'm going to go home. My daughter will meet me at the door or something, and she'll ask me, I'll ask her how her day was, and she'll say it was fine, and she'll ask me how my day was as a courtesy, and I'll say, well, I won this really wonderful prize, and her response will be, cool, Dad. and then I'll ask her if she wants to go out and have dinner to celebrate, and her response, no doubtly, will probably be, well, can you check my homework first? And so my daughter had read all of this, the scenario that I was creating or sharing, and I get home, I don't know she read this. I walk in the door, and she starts playing me. I mean, just repeats everything. How'd your day go, Dad? I won this really great prize. Cool. You want to go out and have dinner? Can you read my homework? Blah, blah, blah. And then she, you know how Elaine pushes Jerry in Seinfeld? She pushed me in the chest like that. So it was a really sweet day. But to me, I wanted to say that the Pulitzer is not about me or even my book. It's about that wonderful sea, the Gulf of Mexico itself. Whatever attention my book can bring to the Gulf of Mexico is what is most meaningful to me in winning this prize. I see the Pulitzer as a win for the sea that there's a sea that I've come to learn that so many people around the country just love and appreciate as nature's gift to all of us. And I open with this little story about winning the Pulitzer as sort of a warm-up and get you laughing. But I open with this story, and the key word here is story, okay? With the story because I want to talk about writing, I want to talk about environmental writing, and a bit about my own writing, which I organize around stories. And you know, many Native people say that the world, the physical and the non-physical world, is made of stories. And they will tell you that stories are written in the land, they're written in the rocks and the trees and all the wild living things. And I've become acutely aware of this fact as an environmental writer, as someone who writes within the environmental humanities. So what the hell are the environmental humanities? What are the humanities for that matter? To me, the humanities, or at least the way I define the humanities, is that they are a collective of creative-based pursuits or modes of expression: art, architecture, the performing arts, literature, of course, music, religion, history, and storytelling that illuminate the histories and the beliefs and the emotions, the aspirations, the moral concerns, and even the challenges of humankind. And we study the humanities to discover original voices that might otherwise go unnoticed outside of creative forms that those voices may be attached to. Blues music, for example, speaks to the experience of Southern blacks during the harshest days of social and political disfranchisement. And we can learn so much from that art form, you know, from the lyrics, from the voice of the singer, from the origins of the song, where the song is performed, who's listening to the music. And in my books, The Gulf, The Bald Eagle, the biography of Marjorie Stoneman Douglas, at every opportunity, I draw on the works of fiction writers and poets and artists and architects and playwrights, lyricists and native storytellers. And I do this for a couple of reasons. First, creative people in your own, I would say 90% of you, I don't know if all of you are writers or not, but all of us at some level are creative, and so I would say all of you in here are creative people. Creative people often have unique insight that can add an additional layer of understanding of the world we live in. But also they in their creative works can aid in telling a story. They can breathe life into your writing and help you engage your reader. But it's not just people I use to tell stories. When you add the environment to the humanities, you draw the non-human world into the larger expanse of the humanities. And the environmental humanities elevate an often ignored reality, and that is, of course, that humans are a part, not separate of, but a part of a larger living system. We're not separate. In other words, we are within nature. Nature shapes who we are, how we live, how we've changed, what we ponder, and what we create, of course. Even in the urban, techno-chemicalized, plasticized, sunscreen world we live in today, nature still has an impact on us. And in my books on the Gulf of Mexico and the Bald Eagle, I explore the dynamic interchange between humanity and nature to tell the story of a particular bird and of the Gulf of Mexico, to write their biographies, if you will. For example, I chose to open the Gulf with the story of the great American landscape artist Winslow Homer and his first visit to the Gulf of Mexico in the early 20th century. And I did this to introduce readers to both the sea, the Gulf of Mexico, and the book through the story of Homer's own introduction to the Gulf of Mexico. And one of the main points I make in the book is that the Gulf is not a regional, but an American sea, to which all Americans are connected both historically and ecologically. Homer was from Maine, so his own faraway connection enables me to set up my larger point about the Gulf as an American sea. Now, I might have opened up the book and for a while I considered this, with an artist or writer from the Gulf of Mexico. But that would not have been as effective as using Homer. That individual would not draw a line in the reader's mind between the Gulf and some other place beyond the Gulf of Mexico. And probably would not have gotten me a literary agent or a contract with the New York Publishing. A story for another time. Paintings at Homer. So Homer went to Homosassa Springs and he completed 11 paintings there. While he was fishing, he was a big fisher. He loved to fish. That's why he was down. That's why he came south. Well, he came south to get away from Maine winters, but he also came south to fish. But at Homosassa Springs, he also completed 11 paintings. And these paintings, in turn, help emphasize for me, in my introduction or in my prologue, the connections that I make as an environmental writer, and that lie at the heart of the book. The connections between history, humanity, and nature. And as an environmental writer and historian, I recognize nature's historical agency, its capacity to shape the course of human history. Most historical works don't recognize nature in this way. But I wanted nature's agency to remain front and center in the book. And in part to do that, I organized each chapter in the book around natural characteristics of the Gulf. Estuaries, fish, birds, beaches, weather, and so forth. And in the prologue, I talk about how Homer's Homosassa paintings convey, indeed, in fact, they themselves convey the forthrightness of nature, the same forthrightness I wanted to present in my book. In these paintings, as I write, his human subjects recede into a dab of color. They appear as small, almost obscure objects against an expansive wall of blue and green nature. And alternatively, I will, in my writing, will turn the table and use nature to say something about people, their values, their priorities, their attitudes, and their relationships with nature, and their social relationships with other people or peoples. We can get a better understanding of social relationships between groups when we look at their separate ecological relationships, because they always shape the way the other one group interacts with the other, and generally the way one group reviews the other. And journeys in nature are a favorite way for me to do this, to use nature to talk about humanity. For example, I open the bald eagle not with the journey of a person, but with the journey of bald eagles launching their fall migration from the Alaskan mainland to the Aleutian Islands. And as readers follow the birds over the ocean and islands, I share some behavioral and physical characteristics of bald eagles. And at the same time, I'm introducing the subject of the book, which is the roller coaster historical relationship between bald eagles and the American people. A relationship that, by the way, culminated in a model environmental success story. And I should say, Florida played this part of Florida played a very important role in the restoration of the bald eagle population in the United States. In a chapter in the Gulf, I follow the travels of a fish, a striped bass in this case, from the headwaters of the Chattahoochee River in northern Georgia down through the Lake Lanier Reservoir of Atlanta onto the Apalachicola River and Apalachicola Bay, which enables me to make connections between the oyster industry in the Apalachicola Bay estuary and upstream activities hundreds of miles away from the Gulf. So what's happening hundreds of miles away, even thousands of miles away from the Gulf, has an impact on the Gulf. The Gulf of Mexico drains over 60% of the lower U.S. and parts of Canada as well. Stories are also a good way to make the complex less complex or palatable for the reader. In discussing the abundance of fish in the Gulf for my book, I could have cited a U.S. fisheries bulletin and written that the total dynamic ichthyofaunal biomass of the Gulf of Mexico consists of 1,443 species of finfish, over 51 species of sharks, and at least 49 species of rays and scapes. Or instead, to make essentially the same point, I could have borrowed words, which I did, from the poet Wallace Stevens, who called the Gulf a fishy sea. In fact, I used that phrase for a title of one of the book's chapters. Or alternatively, I could have quoted, which I did, the poet Sidney Lanier, who wrote of the waters around Cedar Key, saying, "The most marvelous stories are told of the host of fish, even to the stoppage of vessels that have sailed into shoals of them." Now, hold these descriptions by these two poets for a moment, the fishy sea and the stoppage of vessels. Hold them not in your head, but in your body. What might you smell or hear or feel? What might you behold? Do these descriptions trigger some sensorial memory? Do they stimulate your imagination? Or does 1,443 species of ichthyofauna stimulate your imagination? Collectively, the stories presented on canvas, in verse, and in nature form the brick and mortar of the larger story the writer in the environmental humanities constructs. When I start a project, I'm not so arrogant to presume that I know yet how to tell the larger story. I do not try to resolutely dictate the narrative's course. I let the component stories and the larger story emerge organically as I am writing. In fact, I research each chapter as I'm writing. And the stories that emerge from my sources, again, the creative works and their creators, nature, and I do go to the archive, and I do use government documents and other documents and newspaper articles and so forth. But all these sources become my guideposts as I'm writing. They show me the way through the narrative. They reveal to me the narrative syntax, along with unexpected, this is the exciting part, unexpected plot twists and turns. And the collected stories emerging from my sources lead me to the end of a chapter and ultimately to the end of the larger story that becomes the book. When I began writing The Gulf, I wasn't at all sure how to tell this story. The book is really a biography of a place. In my previous book, in Everglades, Providence, was a dual biography of Marjory Stoneman Douglas and the Everglades, of a person and of a place. I told the story of Marjory Stoneman Douglas around the Everglades and the story of the Everglades around Marjory Stoneman Douglas. So I had some experience writing a biography of a place. But Douglas's story and the Everglades story are really neatly packaged together. While the Gulf stories seem so amorphous and disparate. Consequently, I had many false starts trying to write the book. And that's the common thing. You have to go through those false starts. You have to write that crappy paragraph that you ultimately will throw away. But that leads you to where you want to go. But while I was struggling, trying to figure out how to write this damn book, I turned to Walter Anderson, who I refer to as the artist laureate of the Gulf of Mexico. His works made visible what nature is often invisible to most people, and his sensibilities aligned with my own. So even though he had been dead more than a half a century, I sought Walter Anderson's help, not with a Ouija board. I spent the better, he spent the better part of his life on barrier islands off the Mississippi and Louisiana coast. In particular, Horn Island, painting and sketching Gulf nature. His last visit to Horn Island which lies 8 miles out from the Mississippi mainland, was in early September 1965, the height of hurricane season. People would have described Horn as a deserted island. The last person to live on it left 20 years earlier. To Anderson, there was nothing deserted about Horn. It was alive with birds and turtles, snakes, alligators, raccoons, and a pig. It was not deserted. All things, he wrote, exist in themselves. All things, he wrote, exist in themselves, have integrity of their own. Time and again, those things drew him to Horn. They in the light overhead and off the water, the colors across the dunes and the Gulf, the blowing wind and the salt air, and the massaging sand underfoot. Everything, as he said, was arranged with taste. And of course, he was talking about everything in nature. And on this occasion, in September of 1965, all those things drew him into the path of danger. A few days earlier, a hurricane named Betsy, and there are a few people in this room who remember Betsy, plowed across the Florida Peninsula and pivoted northward over the Gulf as a Category 4 storm. It was making its way right toward Walter Anderson. And officials began evacuating the coastal areas of Alabama and Mississippi. A Coast Guard boat came out twice to take Anderson to safety. He hid from his would-be rescuers, who were, of course, sure he was a doomed man. There's freaking hurricanes coming toward you. Where are you? Well, when the eye of the hurricane reached him on Horn Island, wind speeds were hitting 150 miles per hour. But Anderson was where he wanted to be. With the wind and the rain, the thrashing sea, and the island's creatures. No weather, cold or hot, calm or stormy, had ever discouraged him from visiting the islands. He regarded himself when he was on the islands as a privileged visitor. That's his words. A privileged visitor, a witness to nature's way. And Horn Island had always laid bare nature's business to him, including death. Everything about the islands inspired him. And the prospect of discovery stirred a sense of wonder in him. That's why he stayed on Horn during the hurricane. He wanted to witness the hurricane's onslaught and how the island and the creatures would recover from it. Natural destruction, he liked to say, opened the way for creation. And that very creation is what inspired Walter Anderson's own creation. In my book, Anderson doesn't appear as a significant character until chapter 12, which is about the origins, geology, and ecology of, and the human historical relationships with barrier islands. He is the narrative driver in that chapter. And chapter 12 was, in fact, the first one I wrote. I began with it rather than chapter 1 or the introduction because, as I suggested earlier, I knew Walter Anderson would show me how to write the book, to present the story of the Gulf to my readers, that he would show me. The light brushstrokes in his art, the warm and cool colors, the mutating tones showed me how I should be looking at the Gulf. He taught me that you have to approach your subject, connect with it, not just through the mind, but all the senses. He showed me that while we inhabit nature, it also inhabits us. That is what his art conveys to the viewer, and this is what I wanted to convey to my readers in the Gulf. Through stories, then, I am a translator between sources such as Walter Anderson or the Bald Eagle and my audience. Knowing my audience and keeping it foremost in my mind as I write is as important as knowing my sources. Every one of my word choices and the construction of every sentence and paragraph give regard to the readers. Writing is very often painstaking, As a lot of you know, it took me months. It literally took me months to write the first 2 paragraphs in the Gulf. And poor Cynthia Barnett, my good friend, I put her through hell because how's this look, Cynthia? I'd email her. We went back and forth with these paragraphs for at least a couple months. In the Bald Eagle, I experienced a lot of anguish and expended a lot of time before I got certain passages where I wanted them. But sometimes you get lucky, and the words come fairly easily, or I should say, not so painstakingly. Such as these that I want to share with you from the Bald Eagle. Words that make an attempt to make the complex not so complex. One of the oldest types of animals on Earth, birds have always fascinated humans. Dating to the age of rock and cave paintings, they have stirred in the featherless, wingless Homo sapiens a longing to fly, to experience the transcendent freedom and spirit of the air, and to see the world with a bird's eye view. Birds are masterpieces of nature. The fluid beauty in their colors and physical form is living art. Their every subtle and conspicuous movement, the undulating traverse of the wren, the high step of the heron, the dance of the crane, and the contemplative blink of the owl is poetry. Wheeling, pitching, pivoting, swooping, and swerving are an aesthetic. The sailing eagle many a circle sweeps is how the ornithologist and poet Alexander Wilson once composed the Bald Eagle in verse. There has probably never been a time when birds did not capture a place in the literature of Western culture. They establish mood and setting, stand as metaphor and simile, signal suspense and direction, connect readers to characters, and appear as characters. Homer's Trojans in the Iliad advance on the pygmy tribes with a din, recalling the clamorous cries of cranes rising above a measureless rainfall. In Sappho's Ode to Aphrodite, the goddess of love and beauty arrives in a chariot drawn by lovely sparrows. 71 species, from cormorants to nightingales, show up in Shakespeare's works. I write for a general audience. There's just too much at stake in the 21st century environment to limit the reach of my work, which means as a writer I have to be less like an academic than a Walter Anderson. And making the transition to a trade press is yet another story for another time. But writing for a general audience and not writing like an academic does not mean that I sacrifice scholarship. I still do the same kind of research and analysis I would do if I were writing a book that would ultimately linger on a cold steel shelf of a university library. What I'm talking about, the difference I'm talking about here is approach. Academic writers tend to connect to their audience, which is also academic, through the mind. And that's fine, because every form of writing has its purpose. To connect with the popular audience, you have to reach beyond the mind. That's the beauty of the humanities. The reach is built in. The poets and painters and creative people at the core of my books compose not from the head, but from the body, drawing from all the senses. And I follow their lead, and I seek to touch my audience in the same sensorial way. I want readers to see. I want them to hear, smell, and feel what is on the written page. I want them to be active participants in the literature. I want them to engage their own imagination and to experience something themselves, something new. I want them to expand their own vision and understanding of the world around them, around all of us. Let me close with one more example using Walter Anderson. Something he observed on Horn Island. He wrote, "The butterfly here stamps its feet." What a fascinating and beautiful expression. The butterfly here stamps its feet. How could I not use this in my book? to stir wonder in my readers as the butterfly stirred Walter Anderson. What do these words evoke to you, or in you, I should say? I think Anderson was saying that nature demands our attention with this line. Small things in nature touch the heart and the imagination every bit as larger things and human things. All in nature is profound and meaningful. All evokes wonder. For Anderson, there was no creativity greater than nature's. Nature's creativity was to him the basis for human creativity. Wonder and creativity, which are essential to a thriving society, are in turn the foundation of the humanities. Wonder encourages investigation and reflection. If you don't ask, you won't know. Creativity evolves from and leads to insight. It releases us. Creativity releases us from the strictures of the formulaic and allows us to see beyond artificially constructed boundaries. Yes, I confess, I can see in my book on the Gulf of Mexico, on some forgettable page, I give ichthyofauna biomass statistics on the Gulf of Mexico. In the bald eagle, I discuss light refraction and the microscopic structure of feathers and photoreceptors in the eyes of bald eagles. But throughout the book, I let nature and humanities stamp their feet. Thank you. Do we have time for questions? Is that permitted? Yes, well, I guess so. Yes.
Hi, lovely book. I can't wait to read your new one. I was wondering if you've ever drawn inspiration from Simon Winchester's work. And I'm thinking of the biography of the Pacific, and for the audience, he was an Oxford-educated geologist.
Yep. Yeah. Yes, I draw inspiration from a lot of people. With Simon Winchester, I actually liked his Atlantic book better than the Pacific, but he's a wonderful writer. I just go looking for wonderful writers anywhere, fiction, nonfiction. I love the writing in the New Yorker, which claims it's the best writing out there, and on many levels, in some ways it may be, and whatever is the flavor of the day. I recently, this summer, discovered Dennis Johnson, who I wasn't aware of, the fiction writer. I just love his stuff, and I usually find myself all over the map. But yes, certainly Simon Winchester. In the back, oh, Christine. Hey, how are you?
Well, this is sort of like a novice wannabe writer, but
okay.
Question. But how do you keep focus, and how do I avoid like the tangents and going into some black hole into your research? So you get lost in the research. There are a lot of people do get lost in the research and then they never write their book. In academia, it can be a problem for your people writing their second book. But everybody has to find their own process, and it's sometimes one thing works for a while and doesn't later. But one reason maybe that I research as I'm writing is it prevents me from becoming an archive rat who never gets trapped and pulled out, or gets trapped and stays in. But I have a ritual. I get up. I often wake up, as a lot of us do, at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and sane people will roll around until they fall back to sleep. But I get up and I go into my study and I work and I write for a couple hours, and it's become a habit. It becomes a ritual. It does help that I've got dark chocolate waiting in the drawer of my desk, and I don't drink coffee, so I guess that's my equivalent of coffee. But you make an important point. To write, the first thing you have to do is get your butt in the chair, and you've got to keep it there. Now, if you find yourself getting up and walking around, use that time to work out something that you've been struggling with, whether it's a sentence or a word you're searching for, or just something you're trying to figure out. Walks are a wonderful thing. I live in the Duck Pond, 2 blocks from Tom Petty Park, and I will, if the words aren't coming, I'll get up and I'll take a little notebook with me and a pen, and I'll just go for a walk, and things start happening. It's amazing. Even just walking across to the other end of the house can awaken your mind to the answer that you're looking for. I don't know if I have answered your question or not, but I can't emphasize more. You've got to find your own process, and again, sometimes that may take a while. And my process, since I began writing 30 or so years ago, is changed. And there was another hand up. Yes.
How has your life changed since winning the Pulitzer?
My daughter respects me. I'll always be. My identity's changed. I'll always be identified as Pulitzer Prize-winning author. I'm certainly not complaining about that. I think somebody who was an academic in writing, winning the Pulitzer, turned the tables a bit, and I think I'm a writer now who happens to be an academic rather than an academic who also writes books. It's given me a legitimacy that I didn't necessarily have before. It's kept me busy, and I still have. I'm still incredulous about it. And the reason why is when I was a kid growing up, I grew up on Tampa Bay. Is anybody here from Pinellas County by chance? No. I never read, and if somebody told me in high school, and I skipped 30 days my last term in high school, if somebody told me in high school that one day I'd write a book, I would have laughed at them. And if they said, and you'll win the Pulitzer Prize, I literally would have said, what is that? And I'm still dumbfounded by it all, but it's been wonderful. I get to meet really nice people like yourselves, and really nice people from all over. Yes, in the back.
I just wanted to commend you for sharing about your journey and stuff, and most important, the little anecdotes that you dropped in about your daughter. When you write the first book, they say, "Yay, mommy, that's good." When you write the second book, maybe. By the third and fourth book, nobody hears it. Thank you for sharing that, because it is also warm and heartening for us as writers who are writing alone. And then when we publish, we're also alone, so we have to be out there, traveling all the way to Gainesville by yourself without anyone.
Right.
But thanks for sharing. And I think what I am walking away with most are the little tidbits that you have mentioned. Most important, when other authors ask, well, how do you write? Your process is different from my process. All our processes are different. Thank you for sharing. And I think that
Well, thank you for letting me share. Yes, hi, Melanie.
I think you said nature shapes us.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think of the statistics that only 10 to 30% of children play outside every day now?
I think it's very sad. And fortunately here in Gainesville, there's so much outside, and we're probably, I don't think our children are as low as 10%. And but I think it's sad. There's just nature is a wonderful place for you know, both physical and mental and psychological regeneration, and you don't have to go in nature specifically seeking that. It just happens, and I think it's important, clearly important for kids. It scares me that they're going to grow up and become architects who remove windows from buildings. So that's what I think. But you know, we live in the Dock Pound. We have some wonderful parks. Gainesville has some wonderful parks, and and they are so alive with kids. And so and Paynes, we're so lucky to have Paynes Ferry and Lachua Trail, and you know, Sweetwater Wetland Preserve. Oh my gosh, it's become a tourist destination, believe it or not. And it's just fantastic. So we're doing it right here. I wish others would too. Yes?
Would you share with us, and perhaps you don't want to, what your next project is going to be?
Yeah, no, I don't mind. I'm writing a book now on the larger American coast, East Coast and West Coast, and I'm using, so sort of the Gulf writ large, and I'm using, I'm trying to use history to help us better understand how we ended up with our unprecedented environmental problems on our very overcrowded coast. 40% of the American population lives on the coast, on 10% of the land mass, and we're still building despite you know, sea level rise and climate change and intensifying weather. So that's what I'm writing, and I'm finding that, you know, in writing the Gulf of Mexico, so much in what I write about in the book I didn't know, wasn't aware of before. All these, I call my human subject characters, these characters who would just pop up out of nowhere as I'm writing and researching, and it was just a thrill. And I love those kind of surprises. And I'm finding the same thing with the East Coast of the United States and in the West Coast of the United States, and it's fun. It's work. It's hard work, but it's fun.
Did you do a lot of field work, or was it mostly sitting researching? And how did you get out of the office if you were able to do field work?
How did I get out of the office?
Out of the office, yeah. Because you're a professor. So how did the University of Florida let you go off and do what you wanted to do?
Oh, University of Florida. I've been there 20 years. They've been the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences is great. They and you know, we're supposed to research and publish, write and publish, and as well as teach. And the university has been very good to me. I have zero complaints in that regard. I get plenty of time. I'm a work at home person. I don't have to be in the office every day. If there's a meeting, if I have classes, yes, I need to be on campus. But otherwise, I'm at home, and I have this beautiful study. And I produce, so it's been good. But as far as getting out, yes, I do. And you know, the universities give me a couple of sabbaticals over the years, and that's been. I was off 2 years when I was writing the Bald Eagle book because I had a grant that bought a year off, and then the university allowed me to cobble a year sabbatical onto that, and which was right in the middle of COVID. So I didn't have to deal with the hybrid classroom that my poor colleagues did. But in any case, it's very important to get out in the field, to me, to get to the physical place you're writing about. Even if you're writing about it in the 18th century, I still want to see it. And you know, I just want to be there. I want to experience it because I know I'll absorb something. I don't know what it may be, but I'll absorb something and it'll find its way into my writing. You know, William Bartram's in the Gulf and also the Bald Eagle. We all know William Bartram, such a wonderful guy. You know, twice I've been to his home in Philadelphia, and it was important. And with this latest book in the summer, I took a trip along the West Coast. Up the West Coast from Los Angeles to Seattle because I needed to immerse myself into that place. And I can already tell in my writing how that trip has affected me. Yes?
I'm wondering about calling the Gulf of Mexico the American Sea, the coast of America within the Gulf represents perhaps 30%?
50.
50%?
Yeah.
Okay, but still, there's Central America.
We're Americans, we
South
conquer.
America. And yes, and we have conscripted the term America to ourselves.
Yes, you're absolutely right.
That's a little
Yeah.
bit resented sometimes.
Yeah, yeah, of course. So I was saying earlier, I mentioned as an aside that you know, if I had portrayed the Gulf of Mexico as a regional sea, I wouldn't have been able to get a book contract with a New York publisher. And they're very provincial in New York. They have no idea what goes on down here. And I couldn't sell the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas book to a trade press because she was too regional. That was a word that was used. So I was very aware of that with the Gulf, and it was just too important to me for the Gulf, this book, to be a trade press and reach a broader audience. But the Gulf, we occupy 50% of the Gulf waterfront in the United States. That's part of it. Also, part of it is that I knew who my audience would be, and that would be Americans. I didn't include Mexico or Cuba in the book, or at least they weren't central in the narrative of the book, because that was just, would have been, the book's already 540 pages. And so I focus on the 5 U.S. states. But also, the Gulf of Mexico has been written out of the conventional historical United States narrative. You can go to any high school history textbook or survey text that's assigned in college courses, and there's a good chance Gulf of Mexico won't even be in the index.
No.
And if it is, it's only mentioned in passing in the text itself. And so it was important to me to correct this wrong, to ensure that, to show that the Gulf of Mexico has an important place in the U.S. American historical experience in ways that hasn't been told before. Yes.
You're absolutely right. I used to work at a hotel that had book fairs in the high schools in the area. And I looked through some of the history books, and it seemed like every 4 years the contents of the history was changed completely.
Yeah, they do that. The publishers do that so they can sell a new edition. But yeah, and the Gulf just doesn't get really mentioned, or again, it's just it just happens to be this body of water that's, that's there, behind us as backdrop. But as I write in the Gulf of Mexico, in the Gulf, the book, the Gulf of Mexico was very important to Thomas Jefferson. He saw it as important strategically and economically to the United States. He believed Cuba rightly belonged to the U.S. And he encouraged presidents who followed him to go after Cuba. And they tried. So.
And was McKinley involved with some of that?
Well, that Spanish-American War, of course, but even long before that, and the United States offered to buy Cuba from Spain. And Spain more or less gave us the middle finger and said it literally, one of their ambassadors said that Spain would rather see Cuba sunk into the bottom of the ocean than belonging to the United States.
One more question.
One more question, if there is one. Okay. Well, I'm happy, if you brought copies, if you already own the book, I'm happy to sign them. Let me get to the table. Thank you so much.
You can follow Jack out to his table. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Yes.
Anita, I'm Leilani Doty in the Great Oh, okay.
Hey, you.
Hi.
I didn't ask because I'm sure you would tell.